Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz violinist and composer Jason Kao Hwang. We caught up with him on August 12, 2020 during the COVID-19 world to talk about his latest 2020 CD, Human Rites Trio. His music explores the vibration and language of his history, while his compositions are often narrative landscapes through which sonic beings embark upon transformational journeys. His story is a rich one. Enjoy.
Joe Domino with Neon Jazz.
Hey, thanks for calling. Thanks for asking me to talk with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for taking a few minutes out. I appreciate it.
Sure. So are we live on the air now, or are you just being recorded?
I just record it, and then later I edit and do all my spins to it.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So we'll be in good shape. Well, hey, man, it's a weird time on the planet, so thanks for taking a minute out to talk about some jazz.
Yeah. Thank you for all that you do for the music. I was at your website. I was seeing all the variety of artists that you play. It's great.
Cool. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I try to keep everything fresh, as fresh as possible.
A mix of people and time zones, and it's all good for the music, for people to understand it and feel it.
Well, I think sometimes jazz can get pigeonholed. I think it's important those that don't adhere to the tenets of history to see where we're at today can fall victim to it. And I just think there's so much good that's going on in jazz. It's good to have all that relativity to go with it. So it's definitely a good thing. It's very enjoyable. I dig it.
Yeah.
But at any rate, as we know, very, very evident, COVID-19 being a very surreal place on the planet. You have an album coming out during a pandemic. What are your feelings on that?
Well, first, I feel fortunate that we had this recorded and was in the mix stage just right after the pandemic. So, I talked to the guys in the band, Andrew Jury and Ken Filiano, and we just thought we've been playing together probably around 2004. So this recording we really felt was a personal landmark in our collective creativity, and grateful that we were able to record it and have it, because we don't know when we'll play together again. Without the vaccine, we could be not performing for another year or possibly two, because phase 4 of large group gatherings is the last phase, and there'd have to be an effective vaccine, and would have to be, tamping down the pandemic pretty efficiently before we could play live again.
When did you know, like in early to mid-March, that we were getting ready to really run into a huge tidal wave of uncertainty and, having everything shut down?
Yeah, there were early reports in January about, what was going on in Wuhan. And I teach a sound design class at NYU. And so my students from China would tell me that, that the news had been repressed. There were reports of that disease and earlier in the fall, and, there was a lot of anger about that. But we still, I think it wasn't until February we didn't realize it was coming here. And then New York, to shut down a city the size of New York, this is the same, all over the country. The economic repercussions were just unfathomable. And I guess I'm kind of surprised there wasn't some sort of game plan for this type of outbreak. But anyway, New York shut down very, very quickly, and we've been in pretty much lockdown. It opened it up a lot because the protests in New York were crazy, and I really thought that with people shouting and playing instruments within feet of each other that we would have had a big spike in New York, but for some reason that hasn't happened, and I hope it doesn't. but all our concerts were canceled. I had a commission to compose for string orchestra with Matthew Shipp on piano, and that was canceled. And luckily I was able to keep teaching through online Zoom sessions, which I'm preparing to do for this fall. But yeah, it's been a pretty rapid upheaval.
That's what I don't understand here in Kansas City. We had protests. We aren't as dense as New York. We kind of opened things up May 3rd, and businesses started opening up. We heard nothing about anything going up or spiking for well over a month, and then all of a sudden it's gone up everywhere. I'm not understanding, and I'm not understanding because here we've been under a strict mask policy for a month, and I haven't seen a human being around me without a mask on them. So I don't understand what's going on.
Well, New York, I think in early March, there was one reported case in a suburb north of the city. No reported cases, or at least known cases at that time in early March. And then in 3 weeks, there were thousands of cases, and it just kept spiraling. I had a friend who lived behind Bellevue Hospital on the Upper East Side, and he saw dozens of semi-refrigerated trucks as temporary morgues. And I've had a friend of mine who he is a great guitarist, by the way, Iman Fanous. He's also teaches psychiatry and was providing psychiatric services for healthcare workers. And he told me, said that these doctors and nurses were seeing more deaths than anyone would see in their whole careers. One doctor he spoke to lost 10 patients in a week. So a lot of people, I think we have to keep our vigilance high. It's sort of an abstract thing, and you think I'm okay, and so what's the big deal? But it's there. It's very real. It's wiped out families. There's a lot of that for some of the poor communities in New York where families are found dead in their apartments. They never made it to the hospital. So this is a horrifying disease that we should all take really seriously. And I'm sorry to hear that Kansas City is spiking. But, I think that even when we were spiking in New York, Governor Cuomo on the other said that the epicenters would move throughout the country. Somehow epidemiologists understood the migration of the virus and how it would move around.
Yeah, and that's kind of the telltale sign of being in the Midwest, is that everything will kind of be on the coast and it'll kind of make its way into the middle. So, yeah, there's nothing in my brain that thinks anything is fictitious at all. I have people that I know that are in healthcare, and I just don't understand how the waves go and how it works. But, I remember seeing probably in November or December, Beijing was totally empty. No one was out, and it creeped me out. The story freaked me out so much I had to click out of it. I couldn't keep reading it because I'd been hearing about this, but I didn't know the magnitude until I saw. And I'm thinking, okay, this is one of the biggest cities in the world, and no one's out. And leading up to that, everybody was in masks, and they didn't know how it was migrating. And yeah, so it's been pretty intense. But at any rate, with this new album of yours, talk to me a little bit about the artistic approach to it.
The music is that's, how do I answer that? It's a big question. I guess sometimes people kind of wonder about, the composition and improvisation. And when I compose, what is written is what is most essential. It's quite analogous when you hear a great melody, especially a ballad. You can't imagine a single note not being there or a single note being added. And so when I'm rigorously challenging my creative process, what I write down on paper, whether it's a traditional melody or some transitional material that basically organizes our lyrical and our harmonic relationships, which notation can convey so clearly. It is a distillation and that what is essential. And if I achieve that feeling when you have that in the written music, then the improviser really it's material. It's an energy source to take what is written and to go with it, to develop it, to make it your own. And so the music, my music will have an architecture sometimes of rhythms, sometimes a fully stated melody. But I do that in that type of architecture, sort of like a landscape architecture. And if you imagine every instrument as a character traveling through this terrain, defined by rhythms and melody and, cyclical, chord patterns, it's always a transformational journey. You began in one place and you discovered it became someone else by the end of the music. And so to fulfill that, for how my mentors always talked about, and I really came into the music during the latter half of the New York City loft scene. I was in my early 20s, and I was really lucky to play with people like Will Connell Jr., who was coming out of the Horace Tapscott Orchestra experience. He came to New York in the wave with Arthur Blythe and Butch Morris and many others. And, he always talked about how, the music, the true tradition of the music is that of individualism, of being of yourself. There can be, I guess, controversy over the form in a musicological sense of what jazz is, or if there's a purity test or whatever. But the spiritual tradition, and maybe it isn't exclusive to jazz, is that of individualism and of voice. And I would have to say, though, in the art of improvisation, that individualism is empowered. You truly do play the way you feel and the way you hear it. And so to do that in my music, then, everybody has to understand what the journey is. And as we participate in it, we with the telling of that journey is shaped through our synergy. And so that's sort of how I approach the music. And the value. One thing that I would always hear from a lot of people like Will Connell Jr. or William Parker, who I met at that time, and there was a value of these long creative relationships that it's sort of a lot of intangibles grow on the bandstand, and you after many performances, somehow you get a feeling of who that other person is, their language, how they respond, and it affects who you are. So playing with Ken Filiano and Andrew Drury all these years for most of my projects, I think it flows into this trio record, and that's why we were really pleased with it.
So talk to me a little bit about the beginnings of your life. Where were you born and raised, and kind of how jazz became your life?
Okay. Well, I was born outside of Chicago. I grew up in Waukegan, Illinois, which is about an hour north of Chicago. And then when I was, 12 or 13, we moved a little bit closer to Chicago to Highland Park. And, at that time in Waukegan, there was a pretty robust school music program, and I started taking violin in the third grade. And but I didn't get really exposed to jazz till I was in high school. And, unlike a lot of musicians, I'd have to say my parents did not, my parents came from Hunan, China during the war. My father, I think it was 1943. My mom, a few years later, she came with the last American troops to leave China. And so they didn't, Western music was still sort of strange to them, and they didn't really listen to much music. So I'd have to say my musical background, as I imagine it, was that I listened to them speak Chinese, and I didn't understand what they were saying. At that time when I grew up, it was there was always this, the melting pot, doctrine, in which minority people around the world would melt into American society. And so being bilingual was not really encouraged, and we were one of two Chinese families in Waukegan. Same actually when we were in Highland Park. So in a way I was very isolated from my ethnic community. So I would often listen to them. They, of course, spoke Chinese to each other, and I would listen to the language, and the Chinese language, I guess as most languages, there's a rhythm, a timbre, an inflection, there's emotional content, there's phrasing, and there's emotional color to it. And that became a musical experience to me, trying to parse meaning from their language. And so what I imagine as my musical identity comes from that of language. When I was when I came to New York, I went to study film production at New York University, and I started going. I wasn't a particularly focused 18-year-old, so I discovered this organization in Chinatown called Basement Workshop, which is now kind of considered a groundbreaking Asian American cultural institution, nonprofit. That time, and this was like 1976 or so, and it was the first time I had actually even seen those two words together, Asian American, and I thought I saw a flyer in the East Village, and I thought, oh, that's me. I'll go buy this place, and I went there, and I was working with the poetry workshop. I remember talking to Quincy Troop there, and Suzaki Shange was doing readings there. Her play For Colored Girls Only was becoming a hit. June Jordan would read there. So it was a real artistic hotbed, and I started going to the jam sessions, and that's where I really didn't have any training, but for the tunes that had easier cadences, I was playing it by ear, doing something. And Will Connell Jr. was at that session and befriended me, and then he slowly introduced me to the whole loft scene. I started playing with a bassist drummer, Jay Oliver, who had passed away in Berlin a number of years ago. We had a trio called Commitment, and that became a quartet with William Parker and Zen on bass and Zen Matsura on drums. And I think my first gig that I ever did, I was 19, I played at Jolie Wilson's loft, the Ladies' Fort, which was a couple storefronts down from Sam Rivers' Studio Rivby over on Bond Street in the East Village. And I met Butch Morris at the Ladies' Fort. He came to my very first gig because he knew Will from L.A. And I started playing in his early conductions when he was still playing cornet then with David Murray's octet, but he was transitioning to being his conducting to being his instrument. And I played with him through that whole period where he had all sorts of memorable concerts. Jimmy Lyons, I remember, was a great one, and we played everywhere, abandoned buildings, you name it. And I also met Makonda McIntyre in that period, and he also had a orchestra. And Makonda's a great player, great composer, really pioneer in so many ways that maybe he's not quite recognized as he should. But we had great concerts. I remember one year he had a series of guest saxophonists, and we had Henry Threadgill, Clifford Jordan. Clifford Jordan's concert was really crazy. It was great. Who else came in? Arthur Blythe, I think. That was my sort of my formative years. And you know, it was different how we learned how to play then. You know, I would go to sessions where we would improvise for 2-3 hours, and it was a chance where you could really approach your sound with an open mind without trying to please any type of institutional knowledge or tradition. It was really about finding your own voice. And that Commitment Quartet, we recorded in '83, and then in '80 or '81, and then in '83 we went to Europe and played the Merce Festival and Groningen Festival, and a recording came up of that Merce Festival that's in Germany, and when I listened to it, it was really interesting because who I am was right there when I was like 20 years old. It's me, even though of course I've gained a lot more skill and knowledge, but in its essence, that my sound was there, so that was kind of interesting. And that was that LP, and that live concert was re-released by a Lithuanian label called No Business Records a few years ago, and I'm pleased it was recognized. It was one of the, I think, what do they call it, reissues of the year by All About Jazz, or the New York City Jazz Record. So so those are my formative years.
Cool. It seems like you were baptized by fire. Talk to me a little bit about what you love the best about being a musician.
Oh, well, I tell you, I was thinking about what it meant to be a musician, especially, when we're talking about this pandemic, and the pandemic and our isolation. I think it's changing the culture and actually changing our relationships to each other in ways and in a magnitude that we don't understand yet. And I was thinking about, I was at a party a few years ago, and I was talking to someone he was having problems with his son, and he said, Jason, my son comes home and he, instead of going out to play with his friends, he gets on the computer and they do internet gaming, and they don't talk to each other, they don't see each other. And then with the rise of social media in the same vein, there's some beautiful things about Facebook and other exchanges of communication, but that sometimes it becomes a bit twisted too. And so I think the pandemic is magnifying those trends in which we have to communicate through a medium like Zoom or something. And we're losing that feeling of being in the same room and that type of psychic, spiritual exchange that you have that is often unspoken when you're in the same room. And, the music of jazz, as I feel it, is all about that connection. It's all about when you're really playing, an ensemble is playing well. And I was telling you earlier about the empowerment of the individual. If you take that value and you say, well, then, as an individual, to make this music, I need to have empathy. I have to listen to that other person. And I have to respect that other person. And when we give initiative to the music, you really have a feeling that as what is good for my brother and my sister is good for me, because the music is made together. It's truly a synergy. It's a living energy that is created only through the collective, the community. And when we listen to music, like whether you're a musician or a listener, and we have that experience in the same room, the same vibration, and we're feeling the energy of the audience, they're feeling us, there's an entrainment that goes on. We sort of start vibrating as one, and we have this beautiful collective experience that we could remember for years. Were you at that concert? Yeah, I remember that concert. Boom, you have this bond of this spiritual experience that it's hard to say exactly what it was, but you felt it. And so I think as a musician now, I feel that we have a mission, especially when the pandemic ends, to bring this togetherness to the culture through our music. What's going to be strange now is because, the creativity never stops. There's other ways to make music. There's music and where you use click tracks and you do overdubbing. I used to do a lot of film scores. I know all about that, There's, performing through Zoom. There's all sorts of platforms that are attempting, for telemusic making, I think is what the academics call it. And I get that. And there's a lot of creativity in music that can be really deeply felt, made in that way. But the kind of music I'm talking about can't be made that way. You do have to be in the same room. You do have to respond to each other moment to moment. You have to breathe together. And that's when the groove happens. And that's when improvised music is a stream of moment that's just irreducible. There's no wasted energy. There's no wandering around. It's on the music. Each sound is on a mission that drives the next moment forward. That's what I think, what it means to be a musician in these times. And I think that we can be a counterbalance to these other trends that the pandemic is accelerating or magnifying. Our social distancing. It's strange, and I heard another. I don't know what you've been hearing, but another epidemiologist was saying that even with the vaccine, we will be affected for many years. I don't know quite what that means, but I can't get my head around this. Being in this shutdown for multiple years. I actually was watching this video course on the plague of the 14th century, and that went on for years, and then would die down and then recur 20 years later, and it's, pretty horrifying.
Well, I think that's the thing that's interesting in a myriad of ways about the human race is that we're going to have to understand that we have to slow down and realize that we're biology and there's a potentiality that these things can happen. They can rear their head. And, we're going to have to take stock in what we have and who we are. But I think it's going to linger, but I think we're going to limp. And I know here in Kansas City, they've had drive-up concerts with cars. And Bobby Watson did a show about a month ago, and we had another organizer, a very talented pianist named Jackie Myers that did one. And I think those things are going to happen. But I think I have kids. I have a 15-year-old son and a 14-year-old stepdaughter. And I think the most damning thing about this is the psychological, sociological effects that go into this. I was watching, I'm a big sports fan, so I was watching sports with my son, and nothing was on, so we were watching bowling for a while, and we were really getting into it. And one night, I was watching the TV, and it was muted, and it was showing this commercial from the CDC about don't shake hands, don't touch your face, don't do gatherings, don't do this. And it almost seemed like a retooled version of that 1984 Apple commercial. It was so Orwellian. It was so creepy. It was so reversed. You know what I'm saying? It was like everything about it that we're doing right now is a total reversal. As if we didn't already have enough problems with marginalizing certain groups in our society, we now have to damn each other for being human. And I know we can't get together, and I know there's things we can't do, but we've gotten to a point now where we're calling each other out for going outside or being with people or doing things. It's like we've gotten to this human apex of totally crucifying people for doing things that we've been trained for decades to do as humans. We're supposed to make eye contact. We're supposed to shake hands. We're supposed to get out and share this human experience. And unfortunately, we can't now. Now, people like us that have decades on this planet behind us can look in the rearview mirror and then look in the mirror and look at the windshield in front of us and have a level of relativity. But when you're a kid, your whole world is shaken and totally skewed in a way that I can't even comprehend almost how jarring that has to be for youth.
Yeah, and I teach basically it's a freshman required class at NYU. And, I was thinking at 18 is a time where you make lifelong friends. You learn how to work together. You do stuff together, and it's going to happen differently for them, And I really give it a lot of thought how I can help my students, fulfill their visions and their lives, through this time. But there's this other thing about what you're talking about, the intolerance. And I think one thing that shocked me early on in March was the fear towards Asian people. I had a friend in Minneapolis who gave me an early report in March, and his wife is Korean American. She's a nurse, and she would take a Uber every day to the hospital, and suddenly no Uber would pick her up.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, all them Uber drivers driving around, and they see a Korean Asian name, and they go, no, I'm not going to pick that person up. And I was really stunned. And in New York, there had been some episodes of violence that were being portrayed, and I tell you honestly, I felt unsafe at that time, and I actually started to question whether I should carry a weapon and to protect myself. And then I thought, I'm not going to do it, because then I might use it, and I don't want to use it. And also, I feel it would draw that energy towards me, for me to have that energy in my possession, So, but it's still happening in New York, especially certain neighborhoods where there's tension between different immigrant communities. Someone set an elderly Chinese woman on fire down in Brooklyn a couple of weeks ago. And so some really, that's kind of uncommon, but that's a pretty extreme, crime. So I think that's something else that our president, I think, has fanned the flames of those fears.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I'm sometimes, when I hear stories from people that are in urban epicenters like you, I'm thankful that there's enough people that are intelligent and rational enough not to do things like that, because when you get into rural parts, and of course here in Kansas City, there's a lot of rural areas around here, and there's a lot of people that support the rhetoric that's coming out of Washington, and there's that propensity for things like that to happen. So I'm thankful in the bigger epicenters there's a smarter, more logical model of living and genteelness that goes into that. So that's definitely reassuring. But yeah, it's wild, man. And I think that's the thing that gets me the most about this. That's been something that I've been astonished about, is that, no one really delves that much into the fact that everything that we've known as humans was basically revoked within a month. So from mid-March to mid-April, everything that we had been told was a part of our healthy, productive ways of living lives were totally rolled back, and then they've just gotten progressively worse through these levels of ambiguity and not knowing and progression of a infectious disease. I do know this. I only know one thing after all of this. Without a doubt, 100%, without even blinking, not even 99.99%, 100% of what's happened in this country is because of our president. That's the only thing I know for an empirical fact, that's exactly why we're where we're at right now.
Well, it's frightening, but the things he's doing to undermine the elections is stunning.
Oh man.
There was an NPR story the other day that said that talking to postal workers, and they were actually having some of the sorting machines removed from the postal stations. So not only did they get rid of like a whole top layer of executive management, now they're removing sorting machines. Yeah. So, and I really want to do some reading on what happened with Stacey Abrams in Georgia, because I know that that guy used every one of these levers of power to suppress the vote, and he won. So
yeah. It's like a weird novel, man. It's like the whole thing that we're going through right now. Like the other night, my wife had on a show that was a pandemic, and it was from 2007, and everything that was happening in that is happening right now, and it's weird because we just kind of watched, but what I hope happens in light of this is that I am a firm believer in the human spirit, genuinely, purely in the human spirit. When you look statistically at the money that's given during United Way campaigns, it's always the poor. The poorest give the most money, and the richest tip the least when they're out. So the real heart and soul of this planet is in the people that are in the lower 97th percentile, and we will win one way or another. It may take a while. We're going to win, and we're going to come out at least with some semblance of reality that is missing, that's been missing for a while. So that's the only real hope that we can hold on to, is that if we just come together, even though we have all of these shenanigans going on, there's going to be enough people that are going to tip the scales,
Yeah. Well, we gotta do the work to make that happen. But I actually was bewildered as to what can we do when the mail sorting machines are being pulled out. I know, like in Georgia, like they shut down so many polling places that, you have to travel 30 miles or something like that to get to one polling station, and this is how totalitarian rulers win elections,
Yeah, it totally is. Well, that's the reason why the human spirit's going to have to win, because people are going to find a way. If it gets that extreme, if it gets really that bad, people are going to find a way to not do the mail, and maybe that's the thing. Maybe that's going to be the double-edged sword of this. He's made such a big deal about mail, and maybe people are like, I'll just put on a mask. I'm already doing it now. What's the big deal? I'll just put on a mask. I'll wait in line. I'll get in there, and hopefully my next 4 years. So go through the pain of one day for the next 4 years of your life. I think that's a pretty good trade-off.
Yeah. I hope so.
Me too.
But I tell you, the pandemic, as far as with the music too, just as far as even the whole way music or the arts is enjoyed or cultivated around the world. I tell you, like a little story. Who's that guitarist? I forgot his name right now, but he put up this video in New York, and he walked on Bleecker Street between Perry and Cornelia or something like that. That's like, if you don't know New York, it's like a posh kind of neighborhood where there's a lot of little boutiques that are expensive for clothes or gifts. And he did a little video of it, and it was amazing. For these 3 blocks that had all those little shishi stores, they were all gone.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow. I mean, because I don't live in the city anymore, so like I'm outside of the city, about a half hour out. So, and I haven't gone in since March. But I thought, it's very possible, like the institutions that support this music, like the clubs, festivals, they're gonna have to close. They're not gonna make it. And even in Europe too, those the people running them, there's going to be a changeover. It's going to be a new world. I could see for classical music that regional orchestras, they don't have an endowment or really a great board. They're not going to make it. So.
Yeah, you're right. And I guess my only hope is that, like, even locally, these drive-in concerts, which aren't really like lucrative at all, that's come to life. And there's ways that I think musicians can reclaim stakes in sharing music and how they distribute music and how they do things. But you're totally right. I mean, like, when you're talking about clubs and all kinds of different things, there's stories. I mean, even here locally, Kansas City was doing so well before this. We were in a renaissance. People were moving here. So many things were happening, and now it's like, we just don't know what's going to happen. No one really knows what's going to happen. But at the end of the day, what are you going to do? This reality, it's a monopoly. You can't do anything about it. So you just got to kind of brave through it and hope for the best. And, that's pretty much it. So
I was doing some Zoom performances, and I did one with Yoshika Chuma, who's sort of avant-garde theater choreographer, and we had collaborators from around the world, and she made sort of an avant-garde TV show. It was great. And, Steve Swell and I did some music for it, and there's different choreographers in Palestine and in Jordan. But she told me that on Facebook, several thousand people watched it. Now we would have done that in New York, and we would not have drawn several thousand people.
Right. Yeah. There you go.
This is like a new thing. Even though we've been doing some, different groups, musicians have gotten together and put together Zoom concerts, and we're drawing an international audience. People from Europe will just, stay up to the middle of the night or whatever and watch our concerts. So those are, who knew we would be doing that that time. So in a way, it's cultivating relationships, long distance relationships. Even some of the musicians I knew who moved out of New York, like Mark Dresser's teaching out at San Diego. I haven't seen him in years, and he came to my Zoom concert. So, it was nice. And we could talk a little bit afterwards. And, on the Zoom, we would have, there would be, people would hang out on Zoom for another half hour or 40 minutes. We probably wouldn't have talked to him that long if we saw him at a gallery or a club, So.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And I've seen a lot of examples of that. Even with me, I've kind of noticed a little bit more people reaching out for radio in ways that not necessarily they didn't do before, but it's kind of there's just a different feeling that goes into it, because obviously I think radio is a pretty safe medium. It's just one of those things that the transfer of radio waves is safe. You don't have to worry about, even right now with us interviewing, it's safe. People are going to get informed. They're going to get to know you. They're going to listen to radio. It's it's a good thing. So let me ask you this. Everyone has a perception of you. They have a version of who they think you are. Your family, your friends, your fans, your students. But you're living your life. Who do you think you are?
Oh, boy. Let's see now. That's a hard one to answer. But, your question kind of about self-perception and perceptions. I was reading these really amazing essays by Wesley Yang. A lot of them were articles he wrote for the New Yorker, and he put it in a book called The Souls of Yellow Folk. And one experience that, was interesting, because this obviously related to who I am, was he talked about the conversations we don't have. And so, he interviewed one internet, millionaire, innovator, and that guy did an interview and said, one time I was sitting next to this Asian guy, and I just didn't say anything to him because I didn't know him, and he's so different from me, and we just never talked. And Wesley, there's nothing wrong with that. It happens to all of us, whether we're of different races. If there's someone next to us that just seems so different that we don't have that conversation. And in this case, Wesley kind of explored that a little bit more, saying, what if he did have that conversation? It might have changed his life. He was sitting next to an internet billionaire, and they might have connected on something. They may have worked together or something, right? And he talked about those perceptions of maybe it's because Asian people are so this, that, or the other. I don't know, a whole string of adjectives. And so he talked about relationships and that we can color our perceptions with these expectations of people, and that shapes us. And I think that's true no matter who you are or whatever race. We've had that experience of that conversation never had, And so your question is I think interesting, because I really do I don't know if I have an answer for how I perceive myself as others might look at me. I do think that there are times I see myself on video of a concert and all that, and that I look differently than I think I do. You know, it's at my age I'm starting to look more like my father, and what's more interesting is my body language reminds me of him. He passed away quite a while ago, but I started to see his body language in me, and I was thinking about how that influences how I breathe into the music. But I also thought of another story, and I was at a concert at this, what's the name of that place? I think it's the Greenwich House Music School on Barrow Street. And this was a while ago, so I forgot the name of the director, but he told a story that when he was in college, he met John Cage. And they had a nice conversation, and that for years they exchanged letters. And he thought, like, wasn't that extraordinary? Like, I was just a student, and, you know, I wasn't a composer, a musician, and all that. But, like, he responded and had corresponded with me. And he said that he realized later this was how John Cage lived, and that openness to life, that this young student was in his path of life, and he was open to it. And they had that conversation. And he treasured the conversation and nurtured it over the years in corresponding to him. And I really thought that is so wonderful, and I don't know if I do that. And I think I'm trying to bring more mindfulness to that. And that, I think the pandemic is going to, for younger people, create that obstacle of having that conversation. But I think, you know, a lot of the things in Wesley's books, Wesley Yang's essays of how people might perceive Asians was interesting to me, because I have no idea if those perceptions have affected my trajectory into society, into the music business, to relative fame or not fame. I don't really know. There's a lot of other cues in his book. For example, he says it's like in the corporate world, you know, there would be Asian Americans who they're kind of raised to always, you know, listen to others and respect what they have to say. So he was saying, well, if you're in a meeting and you're listening to your boss talk and you don't say anything, they either think you're not interested or you don't know anything about it or whatever. You're just sitting there being quiet, like you're not saying anything. Whereas it's a cultural thing that's how you handle that relationship. So those little cues your question is a really complex one, something I'm thinking about, like actually how do I respond to different situations, and how is that decoded by others? That's a huge thing. But getting back to the music, I think that's what the music can overcome. The music is that conversation that if you listen to someone who's from somewhere else other than your own background or a different part of the world, and you connect to that music, then all of a sudden that humanity, the mutual humanity of each other will be enhanced, you know. So, you know, really, like, the more different types of music you are open to, it's not like you're saying, like, oh, I can't listen to this, it's dissonance, or I can't listen to that. You know, one thing of the democracy of sounds, that all sounds are expressive, whether you're hitting a crunch note on a guitar, going through an overdrive, or you're playing, you know, a beautiful violin vibrato like Heifetz or something, that they're equal sounds of expressivity. And if you think you're open to more sounds and more music, I think you'll be open to more people. And I think that's one of our purposes on the planet as musicians is to do that.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, the one thing about this question is there's so many ways to answer it. Sometimes it's short and simple. Sometimes it's long. And I always like to get to the essence of the musician by this question. And I remember one time, I can't remember who it was, but somebody had said to me, they had a professor one time that said that who they wanted to be in their life was someone that was the same with everyone. And someone that was all the way down the line, that didn't change that much, but they were who they were. and he said his professor was that guy, and that's what he aspired to be, and that's who he was, and that was kind of his Maslowian hierarchy, and I find that interesting, you know. So, but
it's an interesting question.
What's that?
It's a challenging question. I'll probably think about it some more tonight.
Yeah. Well, I say the best for last. But hey, man, thank you for taking some time out today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all you're doing for the music, and thanks for asking me to talk with you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Oakland, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Jason for his time, cool, and energy. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.